Quote, "Government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem," unquote. Ronald Reagan wisely made that remark. Considering creating international agreements will not make exploring space easier, but harder. For this reason, I negate the resolution. International cooperation should not be prioritized in the exploration and utilization of outer space. To begin, I'd like to agree to my opponent's value and also to their definition. With those agreed, I'd like to move on to my three contentions. Contention 1. International cooperation is inefficient. International cooperation is inefficient. Unfortunately, international cooperation creates complication and inefficiency. NASA agrees on its website. Quote, "Operating the space station is even more complicated than other spaceflight endeavors because it is an international program." Unquote. A 2005 article in the Space Review added, quote, "In the case of the ISS, engineering problems are compounded by the number of international partners." Unquote. Because countries have separate engineering requirements, it's difficult to combine systems from multiple countries. The Glenn Research Center gives an example. Quote, "The full US-built system in the ISS consists of an 160-volt network. Meanwhile, there's a 28-volt system in the Russian segment." Unquote. What that means is that the Russia and US have incompatible power systems on the ISS. The US cannot plug any of their equipment into the Russian power system without complicated electrical work. So as we've seen here, international cooperation is inefficient. Either way, collecting other nations' approvals delays action. Combining separate nations' systems is complicated. These principles apply to international cooperation everywhere, not just on the ISS. Language and cultural barriers, separate engineering requirements, and dueling interests make international cooperation deeply inefficient. This brings us to contention 2. Cooperation is risky. Cooperation is risky. Quote, "Iran's nuclear program began under Mohammad Reza Shah's rule in 1957, after the United States and Iran agreed to a civilian nuclear cooperation agreement." Unquote. At the time, this seemed like a smart policy decision, because the Iranian government was friendly to the United States. Unfortunately, in 1979, Islamic radicals toppled the US-friendly government in Iran. Although the US quickly suspended nuclear aid, the damage was done. Quote, "The United States provided Iran with the foundation for its nuclear program by providing both key technology for nuclear research and education in nuclear engineering and physics." Unquote. The nuclear program ended up in the hands of Islamic radicals. This story illustrates a key point. Even though cooperating with Iran seemed smart at the same time, it backfired, as the leadership and goals of the two countries changed. The National Security Archive tells a similar story. In 1994, the US, Russia, and Ukraine signed the Budapest Memorandum. In the agreement, Ukraine dismantled its own nuclear weapons, and Russia promised security guarantees to Ukraine. 30 years later, Russia broke its side of the promise, invading Ukraine, because Ukraine was left without the means to deter Russia, its nuclear weapons. Unfortunately, international cooperation can backfire even if it benefits both nations at the moment. This brings me to contention 3, the alternative. Contention 3. Corporate cooperation lowers inefficiency and risk. Corporate cooperation lowers inefficiency and risk. The reason is simple. Corporations make money, when they deliver results to their customers. Governments win when they dominate their opponents. So corporations and governments have extremely different incentives. And this difference in incentives is why corporate competition is superior. So I'll prove this. Starting with inefficiency. In 2002, a new corporation changed the face of space exploration. SpaceX, the Oxford Review of Economic Policy found, operates twice as fast as NASA, a government entity, and at 1/10 the cost. This isn't an exception, it's the rule. A 1990 study in the Journal of Finance studied privatization, where government-run firms are transferred to private corporations. Looking at 61 separate cases in 18 countries, they found that corporations, quote, improve efficiency, unquote. As award-winning economist Thomas Sowell has pointed out, quote, virtually everything the government does costs more than when the same thing is done in private industry, unquote. Corporate cooperation also lowers risk. I agree with my opponent that repeated costs and information sharing are extremely beneficial reasons to cooperate internationally. But corporate competition can do those same things without the costs of governments handing over sensitive information or being dependent on other nations. On the ISS, for example, NASA administrators have pointed out that the US is, quote, sharing expertise with Russia. That's risky. Corporate cooperation will lower the risk of space exploration while increasing its efficiency, which is crucial in order to achieve the value today. In contention 1, I used evidence from NASA and the Glenn Research Center to demonstrate that international cooperation is inefficient. In contention 2, I used evidence from the Brookings Institute and National Security Archive to show that it's risky. And in contention 3, I used evidence from SpaceX and the Journal of Finance to prove that corporate cooperation is less inefficient and risky than international cooperation. Now, I want to make some things clear. International cooperation is not universally bad. Corporate cooperation is not universally good. The only point I make, which I have made consistently, is this. Corporate cooperation is less inefficient and less risky in the pursuit of justice than international cooperation. Because international cooperation is inferior, it should not be our priority.